So welcome everybody to this thematic workshop on tackling migrant poverty in Scotland. It's really wonderful to see so many of you here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Pegs Bailey. I'm the Third Sector Employability Partnership Engagement Manager for Scotland and work closely with colleagues in Scottish Government, Social Enterprise Scotland, the Third Sector Employability Forum and the Third Sector Interface Network to undertake that work. Really delighted to be hosting this session here today, which is brought to you by Social Enterprise Scotland, the TSI Network and the Third Sector Employability Forum, but is much more importantly being hosted, presented by Becca Kay from Migration Policy Scotland and with contributions from partners who've been involved in some of the work. Well, with that in mind, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Becca to talk to you about the work of Migration Policy Scotland and these particular tools that she's here to share.
Thanks so much, Pegs, and hello everyone. And I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for coming, especially since it's such a lovely sunny day. So as Peg said, my name's Becca Kay. I'm Associate Director at Migration Policy Scotland. We're a small independent charity working on a broad range of themes and topics linked to immigration in Scotland. And our mission is to build a better migration future for everyone. And by everyone, we mean migrants, host communities, and people working with and supporting migrants and their communities. One of the ways we do this is through combining research to gather insight and evidence of the issues and challenges people are facing, with a focus on developing innovative and practical solutions and policy recommendations. And we do that working in close partnership with other public and third sector organisations, many of which are led by and or supporting migrant communities in Scotland. And so I'm really delighted to be joined this afternoon by Shaina, Gabi and Justine, Ehimen, who I think has been able to join, both of whom have been part of our Migrant Lived Experience panel at Migration Policy Scotland, but who also both do incredible work through their own organisations, with which we've worked in partnership to develop and deliver some of the tools and resources that we're going to be presenting and talking about today. So I'll just hand over briefly to Justine and Shaina to introduce themselves. Shaina, would you like to go first?
Hello, I'm Shaina and I am the Advice Services Manager at Citizens Advice Edinburgh.
And Justine?
Hi everyone, I'm Justine, Project Manager at Passion for Fusion, leading on employability and youth work.
So it's really great to have Shaina and Justine here. And as I said, they've been directly involved in developing and delivering some of the tools that we've put together, and they'll talk about those a bit later on. And hopefully my slides are going to move. They were moving before. Why are they not moving now? There we go. Over the last 2 years at Migration Policy Scotland, we've been pursuing an extensive programme of research and engagement to understand experiences of poverty in migrant households, and crucially to understand what the specific challenges and barriers are that migrants face when they try to access support and advice to help them to escape from poverty. A key focus that we've had in this work has been to expand the conversation beyond one that has primarily equated migration and poverty with the extreme vulnerability faced by those in the asylum system, and to look at a much broader spectrum of migrants and the challenges that they face. And our research has found really consistently that all sorts of people are struggling, not particularly dependent on nationality, visa route. Some people who've gained settled status or indefinite leave to remain, they still have many challenges and barriers that they hold in common with other migrants and that they face. They face additional and higher costs, as well as specific and significant barriers to improved employability. Their access to support, advice and social security payments is limited both by formal restrictions, but also by low awareness and uptake. And we found that both migrants themselves and the organisations and services that they turn to often struggle to know what is available to them, where they can be referred on to, or what they may be entitled to. In all our work at MPS, we're determined to go beyond just gathering evidence of problems and challenges, or even just making recommendations. And we seek as well to find ways to develop effective, feasible, and realistic solutions to the issues that our research is uncovering. We use a policy laboratory approach to do this, where we bring together the insights and expertise that come from lived experience, both the lived experience of migration and poverty, but also the lived experience of doing work to provide, deliver, and design frontline services and support mechanisms. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail later. And as I said, Shaina and Justine will also be talking about their involvement with that part of the work and the tools that we've developed together. The focus and the intention of each of these is to help service providers, frontline staff, and caseworkers to feel more confident and more effective in their work with migrant service users. And we're really keen to discuss with you all and to hear from your perspectives about how these might contribute to the work you're all involved in to improve access to effective and appropriate employability support across different areas and locations in Scotland. But first, I'm going to spend about the next 20 minutes talking about the research that we did and what we found and how this fed into identifying areas where some quite simple, low cost but effective solutions could make a real difference. I'll pause after that for any questions or inputs from you, and do feel free to pop things in the chat as I go along, and our hostess with the mostest, Pegs, I'm sure will keep an eye on that and help to direct me back to questions that might have come up that I might not have noticed because I'm too busy looking at my slides and my notes and kind of trying to keep track of what I'm saying. So over the last 2 years, we've gathered insight and information both from migrants and their families who have lived experience of poverty and from support and advice organisations working to help them. And that's included both mainstream frontline services and organisations that have a more specialist focus on supporting migrant communities. You can see from the map that we've been working in all sorts of areas across Scotland. And whilst it can be tempting, I think, sometimes to view migrant needs and issues as being very concentrated in areas like Aberdeen, Edinburgh, and Glasgow, in fact, our research showed that there's lots of needs, perhaps especially so in areas where migrant populations are newer, where the change is happening more rapidly, and where services contact with them has been more sporadic or spread out. It was in these places where we found really strong evidence of a need and a desire amongst support organisations and services for more confidence in their understandings of the specific challenges that were faced by migrants and tools to help them provide effective and appropriate support and advice. The map also shows the range and extent of the research in terms of the different organisations who were involved, and there's more information on the diversity of nationalities, visa routes, ages, genders, employment experiences of people who took part in our reports. And those are all linked at the end of the slides, which are going to be shared with you after today's event. And anybody who wants to know more is very welcome to get in touch with me directly as well. So we all know that the rising cost of living and its impact on essential household expenditure is a significant driver of poverty for families across Scotland, whether they're Scottish or whether they've come from elsewhere to live here. Our research shows that this is also very clearly the experience of many migrant households. The migrant families who took part in our research were consistently struggling to pay for basic things and to meet their essential needs. People spoke regularly about not being able to afford food or fuel bills or having to make choices between heating and eating. Our research with 50 migrant parents experiencing poverty found that 3/4 of them were struggling to pay their utilities bills, and over half of them found it difficult to meet the food costs for their households. Many parents told us they were going hungry or that their families were rationing their energy use in order to make sure that their children had enough to eat. And I'm sorry, every time I say that, it makes me get a bit upset. So in addition to these struggles, though, which they have in common with lots of other households across Scotland, migrant households face significant additional costs linked directly to the costs of immigration. These include the fees that they have to pay to obtain and renew visas and the immigration health surcharge. And all of these are charges that have to be paid for every family member and at multiple points over a longer stay. For a family of 4, they can amount to over £21,000 in the first year after arrival. So these are really significant costs, and costs that people have to keep putting money aside for in order to be able to pay the next time they have to go through a renewal process. Keeping in touch with family abroad can also present significant costs, and we heard of people struggling or falling into debt to cover the costs of travel for funerals, for weddings, or when an elderly relative perhaps became ill or less able to care for themselves. I don't need to tell people in this group that improving employability is a big priority for organisations and services that are trying to help drive down poverty. And almost everyone we spoke to through the research saw increasing household earnings as the best way for migrants to lift themselves away from poverty or the risk of poverty. But there are a number of specific barriers which migrants face when it comes to increasing their employability. Many migrant workers experience underemployment in Scotland, which means that they have difficulty getting a job that matches their skills, their qualifications, or their experience. This can be made more difficult by problems that the people face in getting overseas qualifications recognised, but we also heard about problems where employers weren't able to or were unclear about how to properly value and acknowledge experience or more soft skills that might have been gained through employment outside of the UK. Our inputs to the Scottish Government's external engagements around tackling child poverty have contributed to greater awareness on this, but it remains a really significant barrier for many people in the Scottish employment context. Migrants can also be particularly vulnerable to precarious work and labour exploitation, and this is especially acute for those people who have visa conditions that restrict the hours or the sectors in which they can work. So, for example, international students who might have come to Scotland with family, may have dependents who are also reliant on their income. They are allowed to work, but only for 20 hours a week. And as you can see from the quote in blue, that 20 hours can be further reduced by the fact that it's actually quite hard to find a job that gives you exactly 20 hours. And so people may find that they can't work, for example, more than 2 7-hour shifts, because a third shift would push them up to 21 hours, and that would be over the limit. Care workers are another group that have quite tight restrictions on their work, so they can take on additional work if their first job isn't paying sufficient, but it must be within the care sector. So they have to find another job where they can fit in the hours with a second care provider around the support that they're already providing for their main employer. For those groups of migrants where English isn't a first language, language barriers can hinder access to employment or progression in a job or career. But lack of time or money to attend language classes, to take top-up exams, or to gain relevant UK experience through volunteering can contribute to a vicious circle, constraining the options available to people who are stuck in jobs with low pay, long hours, and sometimes poor conditions. Access to childcare is another one where we know very well that this is a big issue for parents, wherever they come from, in terms of increasing their employability, and it's one that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Our work with migrant parents found that difficulties in understanding and accessing their entitlements to funded childcare hours, as well as having fewer options for accessing informal childcare through friends or family, was a significant additional barrier. So funded childcare hours are available to all children aged 3 to 5 living in Scotland, and to some 2-year-olds. And parents' nationality or migrant status aren't part of the eligibility criteria, although there are quite strong restrictions on eligibility for 2-year-olds. But we found very low uptake of hours in migrant families, and confusion both amongst parents themselves, but very significantly also amongst advisors and providers around whether there was entitlement to this for people who had come to Scotland through the immigration system. Alongside reducing costs and increasing incomes through employment, improving access to incomes and support through social security is a third strand in Scottish approaches to poverty reduction. Again, I don't think that'll be a surprise to anybody on this call. But for large numbers of migrants whose visa status includes a no recourse to public funds condition, they're excluded from access to social security payments and benefits, including most of those paid through the Scottish Welfare Fund. This closes off pathways out of poverty available to other groups and removes a safety net in times of uncertainty or unexpected loss of income. That said, a point which I think is not mentioned enough is that no recourse to public funds, or NRPF as it's often termed, firstly does not apply to all migrants, and secondly does not apply to all types of assistance, even those that are paid for through public funds in some broader definition of public funding. The largest group of migrants in Scotland who do have resource to publicly funded benefits are EU citizens with settled status, and most of those with pre-settled status, as long as they can prove a right to reside. Most people who've come through the various Ukraine visa schemes, and other groups who have leave to remain. So there are some quite substantial groups of people who may be migrants in Scotland, but will have access to publicly funded benefits. But it's also the case that the large group of people who have a no recourse to public funds condition attached to their visa are not excluded from all forms of public support and assistance. For example, they are entitled to access a wide range of advice and support services, including employability advice, careers advice, debt advice, financial inclusion and income maximisation advice, regardless of whether that's advice provided by a publicly funded provider. And they are entitled, as I've already said, to funded childcare hours, to free school meals for children in P1 to P5. They may be entitled to free school meals for older children or to help with the cost of school uniforms. And they are entitled to use food banks, whether or not those are publicly funded. However, we found consistent evidence that people are unaware or wrongly advised about these entitlements. And the complexity around knowing who is or is not subject to NRPF and exactly which forms of support it applies to, and the fear that both claimants and advisors have of getting something wrong, means that even where they are eligible for support, there are people who are missing out. And the example on the slide is of a couple who were too frightened to use a food bank for fear that it might infringe their NRPF conditions and therefore mean that they had a challenge to their visa status when they were in a situation of really quite desperate need, and the woman was pregnant. They didn't take up what was their entitlement, which was to get food packages from a local food bank. To unpack one aspect of this difficulty people experience in accessing support and advice, our research on child poverty in migrant households involved interviews with migrant parents, and we found that 50% of those parents had no experience of accessing advice or support to improve their employability, and a further 8% had tried to access advice or support but had only negative experiences of that. In contrast, only a quarter had wholly positive experiences of getting support and advice around employability. And when we spoke to local authority and TSI-run employability schemes, some of them told us that they were themselves unsure about whether they were allowed to offer publicly funded advice to people who had a no recourse to public funds condition. And the answer to that is that you are, in case anybody's still wondering. Meanwhile, 40% of parents in this group had either no experience or solely negative experience of seeking advice and support to reduce costs and maximise incomes. Where people told us that they had had helpful support and advice, and you can see some examples of what they said about that in the green quotes on the slide, it was because what they'd experienced was proactive, was linked to a wider understanding of the barriers and challenges that migrants are more likely to face, and was well joined up to other forms of support and assistance. So they'd been able to be referred on to perhaps more specialist services that could offer them support, for example, with housing. Unfortunately, our research flagged up that Scotland's existing landscape of services and provision is often not well suited to meeting migrants' needs, particularly in terms of providing this kind of joined up and person-centred support. we found a lot of evidence that migrants encounter what we began to see as a divided landscape of provision when they seek to access support and services that might help them to maximize income, to navigate systems, or to increase their employability. So on the one side are specialist migrant-focused charities and organizations. Mostly these are very small, precariously funded, and with limited reach into publicly funded and mainstream programs of assistance and limited specialism around specific areas of advice or services. On the other are a mix of public and third sector organizations providing employability and income maximization services, but with varied experiences of supporting migrants, and often with limited awareness of the specific barriers and challenges that migrants face, and lacking confidence in how best to support or even communicate with migrants who come to them for help or advice. As I mentioned at the start, these issues are perhaps particularly pronounced in areas with newer or more rapidly changing migrant populations. And I know that there are some people in the room from areas like that we've had specific conversations about about this already in the past. Both sides of this picture we found are separately well connected. So if you think kind of vertically down those two columns, there's a lot of connection and a lot of networking between migrant-focused organizations and between mainstream services and support. But lines of communication, relationships of trust and collaboration horizontally across these two sides are much more difficult, sporadic, and incomplete. Too often this leaves migrants who are seeking help in a kind of revolving door of referrals sent back and forth between organizations who for one reason or another aren't really able to meet their needs. And it leaves support and advice services and frontline staff worried and frustrated, wanting to offer support, but often not knowing what or how to do for the best. So, having gathered this evidence, we began to look for interventions and initiatives that could make the work of supporting and advising migrants easier and more effective without adding an additional burden on what we know are already very stretched services and organizations and very limited budgets. We'd pinpointed that there was a need for services to be better joined up and for migrants to be able to navigate their way to and through them more easily. And that there was a need for person-centered approaches, which are adopted by many services across Scotland, to be adaptable to suit the experiences and barriers that are more specific to people who've moved to Scotland from other countries. It felt like solutions that could make a real difference must be within reach, and we set up a policy laboratory to pinpoint more precisely what was needed, where there were gaps, and how we might help to fill them. And we're going to go on in a minute, myself, Justine and Shaina, to talk a little bit more about that and about the tools and resources that we developed. But first, I'd be really happy to pause and take any questions that you might have on what I've presented so far, or I'd be really interested to hear from any of you about how this feels from your perspectives and from the work that I know you're all doing on employability and support in your areas of Scotland. So I'll just pause for a minute and see if there's any questions or comments that people want to make.
So I was going to also say, people, if what you've heard there, if that resonates, you can give a little love heart or a little thumbs up. That's always helpful to see if it just does this describe and feel familiar to the landscape that you are navigating. So yeah, I'm seeing a few hearts and thumbs up coming up there. Oh, some big exploding ones. Don't know how you get them.
Don't explode any hearts.
Thank you so much, Becca. Becca, right?
Yes.
I got emotional when you got emotional, and it's also because this is the first time I'm hearing so much being done about the needs of the community I serve. And I am also someone with the lived experience of virtually everything you've talked about. So yeah, I am emotional at the moment, but I just wanted to say that the work you're doing is very important and very needed. And thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a huge amount to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhea. And we've seen there's a hand up. Is that Emma? Yeah. Feel free to unmute and say.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Becca. So I just wanted to say, because I'm based in Wick in the north of Scotland, and I notice up here that churches seem to be hugely important to supporting migrants. So more often than not, if I come across migrants and especially refugees, they'll be getting a really significant amount of support from the local church, to the point where if the church fell out the picture, they'd be in a really desperate state. And I don't know whether this is something geographically specific, being in Caithness, but I just wanted to highlight that because I thought it was quite an interesting observation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think churches and other places of worship do often step in and provide support. And I think that can be, a really crucial lifeline, in the same way as other forms of community-based organizations or charities often provide a lot of support. I think one of the things that we're hoping, and I hope it'll be clear when we present some of the resources to do with this, is to make sure that that doesn't mean that migrants are just directed always out of what might sometimes be better funded or more specialist or more kind of joined up services that are set up with the prime purpose to help people in Scotland who need help around housing, around employability, around income maximisation, and that instead they're being channeled into a kind of parallel set of services that don't have the same resources to do that. So yeah, that's not to put down anything that's being done by churches or by community organisations. It's crucial work, but it shouldn't be the only safety net that one part of the population has.
I'm just noticing we just got a couple of comments in the chat. I'll just bring in, because I'm not sure if you can see them, Becca, but Ian raising the issue about the non-transferability of qualifications and how difficult that can be in terms of getting that recognised with the underemployment point. And Ishba, just adding to your comment about the churches, also saying the role of mosques that they play in that same space. And I think it speaks to the need for that better intersectionality between kind of some of the specialist or community organizations and some of the more mainstream bits of the picture. So just kind of getting that echoed in the chat. So I don't know if you want to say anything else on that before we move on, or?
No, that's great. And I think those are really, really great comments and really important points to make. And just to say again, like, part of what we saw was, as I mentioned, a kind of revolving door of referrals where someone would come in to maybe a local authority service or a mainstream advice service and be directed for very good and well-meaning reasons to, there's a migrant-led organization that you should go and speak to, or there's a church that supports people from your community. And then when they go there, of course, those places don't have specialist support and say, you really need to go back and talk to your Citizens Advice Bureau, or you really need to go back and talk to the local authority. And they go back to them who say, oh yeah, go back to the church, and people go round in that circle. And that's really exhausting and demoralizing. And what we found was a layering effect where both that person, but what they then say to other people who they know with a similar background is, there's really nothing for us. People might mean well, they might try and send us places, but there's nothing. When you get there, you go back round the circle again, and that kind of builds up a sense of exclusion and not having access. So those are some of the things that I think we really hope and believe that some of the tools and resources we've developed can help to tackle.
There's one more comment which I think is about the need for translators, so that ties in beautifully with one of the tools that you picked up. And then Alison from Skills Development Scotland just talking about their access to the NARIC system around qualification comparability. So I think maybe, Alison, if you just pop your link in the chat, or so people know where to go to be able to get insight into how SDS can help with that. I think that's super helpful, because that is a really useful tool.
It's a great tool, and there are some professional qualifications and some degrees where and some countries where there's much more straightforward transfer across, but there's still very much lacking a system where people could quickly and relatively easily find out which parts of their qualifications map across, what kind of top-up is needed, how that could be provided. And there have been some great initiatives, partly linked to some of the work that was done around the Homes for Ukraine scheme, where there were efforts made to work out how to top up qualifications so people could teach in Scotland, or so people could take up some health roles in Scotland. And I think that there's a basis there to be worked from and improved upon. So I'll go on now and talk about our policy laboratory and what we did before handing over to Shaina and then to Justine to talk a bit more about some of the specific resources. So as I said at the start, at MPS, we're passionate about research that makes change happen. And our policy laboratory is an innovative approach to achieving that. It's all about bringing people together to solve problems by delving into the nitty-gritty of what is needed to create changes that are practical, feasible, and effective. And those are they're three really key watchwords for us, that we might be able to think of all sorts of things that in an ideal world we would do, but we want to find things that are really feasible and likely to be effective and practical. So our policy laboratory approach focuses on harnessing the insight and experience that comes, as I said before, both from the lived experiences of migration and poverty and from the lived experience of frontline staff, service managers and policy makers. And we think that that helps to get that kind of bit of the feasibility and the effectiveness to come together well, that you hear from both sides about what would really help me and what am I really able to think is within my reach to do and to change about how I deliver services. So together we look to identify, design and plan for the implementation of feasible and effective initiatives and resources that can offer solutions to some of the issues that were evidenced in our research. The Policy Laboratory on Poverty brought together 30 people from a variety of public and third sector organisations across Scotland, including both those with a focus on working with migrants and those set up to provide mainstream services. It included organisations specialising in employability, financial inclusion, income maximisation and energy advice, and around a third of those participants also had lived experience of migration and poverty. In just over 9 months, we designed 4 Pathfinder initiatives which offer support to overcome the barriers and challenges identified through the research, both from the perspectives of migrants struggling to access support, but also, and equally importantly, from the perspectives of advisors, caseworkers, and service providers who want to offer appropriate and adequate assistance, but struggle to do so. And so I'm going to hand over to Shaina now to talk to you about the first of the resources that we've developed.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me join. As mentioned before, my name is Shaina, and I am the Advice Services Manager at Citizens Advice Edinburgh. And within that role, I have shared responsibility both for our volunteer generalist advice service that focuses on benefits, debt, housing, and employment. But I also have overall and specific responsibility for the organization's delivery of immigration advice. And within that, we support in the delivery of Scotland's migration service, so helping people to move and settle within Scotland. This work with the Policy Lab and the creation of these resources that you'll hear about today fit really well in that overlapping space between immigration advice, but also income maximization. But it was also something that was quite personal to me and my family's own experience of having a small child and being subject to visa restrictions in terms of accessing public funds. So working within the income maximization sector, a large focus tends to come on benefit checks. And while there is a really good reason for that, and there is the opportunity to maximize income there, when you're working with individuals that are no recourse to public funds, this narrow focus on benefit entitlement can sometimes make it feel like no help will be available to certain users. So we wanted to look at how we could help support conversations between individuals and caseworkers so that when someone does reach out for help and they are subject to the NRPF condition, that they don't simply feel like the answer is no, that there's nothing out there. So this guidance gives a possible flow to conversation. So where the NRPF condition does apply, instead of maybe saying, well, you can't claim most benefits, it might be switching the conversation and first looking at how can we reduce costs, where can we save money. So finding little wins along the way to help build that rapport between the caseworker and the client. But the guidance also gives context to certain situations. So understanding unique costs or barriers that migrants face, particularly in topics like housing or energy, childcare, and the additional immigration costs that some individuals will be going through. And the guidance helps to build that confidence that some support is available that isn't a public fund. So there will be things that everyone can access regardless of their immigration status. And the hope was that the guidance would help with these conversations for building that confidence, but also building that trust between organizations and their service users, so that everyone feels welcomed and feels comfortable to continue those conversations rather than feel like the door is being closed. Becca, if you want to go to the next slide. So what we did after we had kind of put the guidance document together and had this kind of draft one that was being used, we had a pilot, and that was a 6-week pilot over January and February. And it brought a number of different organizations together. So ourselves at Citizens Advice, but also Citizens Advice in Dumfries and Galloway. We had CHAI within Edinburgh, Citizens Rights Project, as well as Falkirk Council's advice team. And so it covered a few different areas across Scotland. And a lot of benefits came out of this. So individuals said that they had increased confidence in understanding the challenges and difficulties that migrants face. There was an increased ability to offer support that was tailored to individuals, and it had that positive impact on that relationship and individual's experience. So feeling more welcomed and being able to access services. But a good thing about this guidance also is it kind of highlights to organizations where they might want to consider their service in terms of adapting different tools or practices so that you're better able to support individuals. So for us, for instance, we looked at our income maximization or our kind of basic budgets and looked at the questions that we were asking around what people spend money on to make sure that it was tailored to individuals. We also looked at access to food within the community and making sure that we had more concrete relationships with individuals of where we could signpost people to find culturally specific food. So it's kind of looking not just at the guidance and those conversations, but how can you adapt your own service? So we found it quite useful within our practice. And I'll pass on to Justine.
Sorry, Justine, there's just a quick bit that I'm going to say, and then I'll pass back over to you. So we've got these 4 resources, and I should have made clearer that we're going backwards and forwards between ourselves. So Pegs mentioned that somebody had put in the chat about translation services, and certainly one area where our discussions in the policy lab showed that frontline staff in mainstream services really wanted support and assistance was in increasing their skills and confidence in communicating with people whose first language is not English. And this also resonated with challenges that migrants had told us about that they face in trying to access services. And whether a translator is needed or not, often there needs to be a first point of contact before you even know that a translator can be available or what translator is needed. So there was a real issue around early encounters, sometimes taking place over the phone, which for anyone who speaks more than one language, you probably know doing it over the phone is even more challenging. You've got no facial cues, you've got no body language, you can't use props and bring something and show it to somebody, but also at reception. And so we began working with Glasgow Clyde College to develop some resources to support accessible communication. We've developed a handbook and a wall poster with some simple do's and don'ts with visual tips and reminders for frontline and reception staff, encouraging people to think that even if somebody might have quite a lot of difficulties with English, there are ways in which we can communicate and help each other to understand, and we can find ways to talk. But we've taken this further and gone on to support our Migrant Lived Experience panel to develop a new and exciting training offer. And now I'm going to pass over to Justine to talk to you about that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Becca, and everyone in the room. Thank you so much. It's been exciting so far. And taking it from Becca's last statement about intercultural training, it was one of the hallmarks of the MPS so far. It's also spot on, and it comes from several perspectives. For example, we've had instances whereby people are talented, they are ready to work, but often facing challenges around confidence, communication, navigating different workplace culture as staff. At the same time, employers too want diverse talents, but don't always feel equipped to fully support or understand that diversity. So this pilot was designed to bridge that gap by building mutual understanding, not just skills. Because to be honest, skills alone isn't enough. But that's mutual understanding, irrespective of people's differences and uniqueness, would always help make the workplace and the community in general a much better place for everyone. Yeah, so next slide, please. Yeah, so as shown on the slide, the training session, we had two pilot online sessions in the month of March, and the feedback from the participants was so great, as you can see some of them shown on the slides. And one of the key themes that resonates across both sessions is participants talking about how culturally aware and understanding that they have become as a result of the training. Yeah. So a lot of participants also went away feeling more empowered, seeing themselves in the same shoes as the other person. And to be honest, some even admitted to have been faulty one way or the other as a result of the things that were revealed. But the good part is that it was so engaging. Nothing was judgmental. Nothing was being picked on. Nobody was being picked on. No organization or individual was being put on the spot. So everyone represented. Everyone's views was respected. And at the end of the day, participants are asking for more. So, and that tells that the training sessions were really impactful. And yes, there will be more sessions coming up, and at the end, this is going to be good for everyone, not just for an individual organization like Passion for Fusion or the MPS, but for all both tech sector and private organizations. Yeah, thank you so much. So Becca, can take it up.
Thanks. Thanks, Justin, for talking us through that. And yeah, just to add about that training, that one of the things that we thought was important about it was a way of kind of harnessing all of the expertise and the really rich insight that migrant-focused organizations have, and bringing that to mainstream services that may feel that they're lacking that. And one thing that we're really hopeful about with the training as it goes forward is that it can also be a way to build bridges between those two sides of the support landscape that I was talking about before. And with both of those two tools that we've presented so far, we're taking them forward into next year. We've been fortunate to get a little bit of resource to continue the work. So the financial health checks guidance, we're hoping to do some work with Citizens Advice Scotland to roll that out so that it's available in all their Citizens Advice Bureau. But we're also keen to hear from other services or partners who would like to use that, would like training in how to use that, or would just like to have it available for their advisors. Following on from the pilot, we've tweaked some small bits of the guidance that the 23 people who took part pointed out could be helpfully updated. But yes, if anybody wants access to the guidance, please let me know. I'm happy to send on copies once we've had it reprinted. And for the training, we've managed to access some funding, which means that we're going to be able to run it again several times next year, and basically watch this space for that. Sign up to MPS's newsletter and you'll see announcements about when that's going to be available, and I'm sure we'll be sharing that with Pegs, and that she'll be able to make that available through the TSI network as well. But I just want to finally talk about the last tool that we've developed in our little toolkit. So this is a series of locally specific migrant focused service maps to help both service users and advice and support agencies to find their way around available support, and to assist when making referrals, to have confidence that you're referring to somebody to a place that is set up to and equipped to help them. So knowing where to turn for help and navigating an unfamiliar landscape of advice and support services presents specific challenges for people who've moved to Scotland. Advisors and services can also struggle to know where best to direct a migrant service user. We talked about that a bit also in the middle of the presentation. And so we wanted to produce resources that could be helpful for that. And we were convinced by what people in the policy laboratory said, that they needed to be locally specific, they needed to be place-based, they needed to be kept regularly up to date, and they needed to be really solidly, really based on organizations having bought into the idea that they could provide those services, and they could cope with an increase in referrals, that they had the capacity to say, yeah, we need to be found by more people from migrant backgrounds, and we will be able to help them if they come. So the leaflet we've developed is based on the model of the Worrying About Money leaflet that's produced by the Independent Food Aid Network, or IFAN, but we've adapted it to become a Move to Scotland and Worrying About Money leaflet that's suited to meet migrants' needs and populated to signpost to appropriate organisations and services in each area. There are 4 of these that have already been fully developed, available. So the first one was for Aberdeen, then we had one for Dumfries and Galloway. Most recently, we've got one for Aberdeen, which has just been printed this week, and there's one for East Lothian that I think is going to be printed next week. We also have Dundee working on one, and Fife, South Lanarkshire and East Renfrewshire have all expressed interest. So we're on our way to our desired goal, which is to have one available for every area in Scotland. And the leaflet follows the simple step-by-step process that IFAN have developed in their main Worrying About Money resources. So you may have come across the main resource. These already exist in every local authority area in Scotland. But as Shaina was saying about financial health checks, the sort of main leaflet is primarily designed for people who are familiar with Scottish or UK social security systems and who have access to social security payments and other public funds. So there's a lot of information on there about what to do if your benefits have been sanctioned, or how to make sure that you're claiming everything that you're entitled to. And they're a really great resource, but again, the sort of thing that you might pick up if you have no recourse to public funds and just straight away think, well, this isn't for me because I don't have access to any of those sorts of things. So the Move to Scotland and Worrying About Money leaflet uses the same principles of a step-by-step process that's been tried and tested in the main resource. The first page asks what it is that's causing someone to worry about money. But this is adapted to recognise the kind of worries and issues that migrants are more likely to face. So it's got sections on not knowing what your rights are, not knowing who you can speak to about your problem. It has up front flagged up things around needing money for visa fees or for vital travel, needing to service overseas debt, potentially, as well as debt that you might have in Scotland or the UK, or just struggling to navigate a new context. And it focuses less specifically or less upfront on benefits and social security entitlements. The letters next to each question there then signpost the person to the next page on the leaflet, which gives them more information about what they can do under those circumstances. I realise it's probably too small to read well on the screen, but there are links in the slides where you can find the resource on our website. So each of these sections, again, acknowledges the specific barriers that migrants may face and highlights the support available regardless of visa restrictions, as well as reminding people to check whether they or somebody else in their household may in fact be eligible to other kinds of support that they may have assumed they're not eligible for. So it follows the same kind of principles as the financial health checks that Shaina was talking about, of trying to show people that there will be things available to you, whatever your restrictions, but also do check, because the restrictions may not apply to things that you think they apply to. They may not apply to everybody in your household, or you may be able to challenge them yourself. The leaflet then gives information on where to find help and who to speak to, and each local leaflet signposts to organisations who've specifically said that they have sufficient capacity and experience to support migrant service users. So people using the leaflet as a referral tool can also be confident that they're sending someone to a service that will be equipped to help them. And what's brilliant for us is that we're partnering with IFAN to do this, and IFAN have resource and do regularly check all of the organisations that are on the leaflets to make sure that they're still happy to be listed and that they're still able to provide the services, because we know that that picture changes over time. Finally, the back page of the leaflet provides more detailed contact information to those local organisations and has a general information section that has again been adapted to focus on making sure that people, for example, know what documentation and evidence they need to bring with them to an appointment, and on highlighting support that they're most likely to be eligible for regardless of visa restrictions. IFAN have also been able to access some resource to start translating these leaflets, which is really great. So I think we've got versions in Polish and Arabic that are currently underway for all of the areas that have them so far. And IFAN also produce an easy read version and an A3 poster version that can be displayed in places where the leaflets are available for people to take away. Feedback so far from the local areas that have moved to Scotland and worrying about money resources, that it's really helpful, and that particularly for advice and support agencies themselves, it's really useful when making referrals to ensure that these are more effective, and reminding people that there is support that will be available to them. Both us at Migration Policy Scotland and IFAN are really keen to have these available for more areas. We have a template and a process which is relatively straightforward, and especially so for people like yourselves who already have really good knowledge of the existing support landscape in your area. IFAN have the funding, the expertise and the capacity to produce the leaflets, and they provide all the technical and design work, and they print the leaflets and send them to you free of charge, and they put them on their websites and give you links that you can put on your own website, and they even get them translated and make translations available. So it's a really fantastic offer that's out there. What you would need to do if you want one for your area and you're not lucky enough to be in one of the 4 areas where we've already got one, is to find the organisations to populate it. And that is a job of work. It does involve backwards and forwards with organisations. There's not, as you can see, a huge amount of space on the leaflet. So there's work to be done to work out which are the best organisations to put on there, making sure that the information about them is really there and up to date. But if there's anyone on the call who's not in one of the areas I've said already has a leaflet and you would like one, please do let me know. Either through the chat or probably better by getting in touch later, and yeah, we'll be really happy to talk with you about that and to provide support to sort of see you through the process. There's 2 slides at the end that just show you some other useful resources that you might want to look at, and gives you links to our research reports and recommendations. And as I said, these are going to be shared with you after the event. So I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can all see each other a little bit more, perhaps, or a little bit better. And I don't know how much time we've got left. Have we got some time left, Pegs? Very happy to have any more discussion or any more input from people. And I'm sure that Shaina and Justine also would answer questions if you have them for them.
Thank you so much, Becky. And I could see some thumbs up and hearts coming up as you were talking about some of the resources. I hope everybody can see, just you can tell the amount of effort, the thought, the research that's gone into making sure these are kind of things that can be lifted up and be instantly practical and useful to people working in many different spaces and places. So this is now, we've got, I think, half an hour still for questions or reflections. My chat has kind of gone a bit weird. I pressed something on Zoom And but so I can now see it, but it's huge. So I note there's a question from Sahil. I don't know. It might be best, Sahil, if you unmute and ask that question, because it's quite a long one and I don't want to read it out on your behalf. But around, I think it's to do with around the sort of studying or status. So I don't know if you're still here, Sahil, or if you're able to unmute. You might not be in a space where you can. Sometimes that happens. No. In that case, I will try and read it out. So the question is it correct to ask Migration Policy Scotland? I've interviewed over 100 plus candidates since October who are currently on student visas, and nearly all of them have reported the same issue, which is bias during the application and hiring process. Their applications are often and mostly rejected regardless of their qualifications, because organisations already have a preference over some candidates. So where is the support, or are these processes meant to help people find work, or are they mainly for collecting information? So do you believe someone pursuing PhD and masters is not credible enough to work even as a waiter or bartender or cleaner? Yes, that too is 3 interview stages. I've heard that. I have a niece who is studying and trying to get work in Edinburgh, and was white British also, just to be really clear. So this was not anything else issue. She was put through 3 interviews as well. It's kind of crazy for a bartender job. So I think that there is a real issue there. So I think the final question is, what do you think, how poverty can be tackled if there are no fair opportunities provided to people? Yeah, thanks, Sahil. Sorry you were unable to unmute. I didn't want to put you on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that these sorts of experiences are out there, and that they are incredibly difficult for people facing them, and for being rejected from jobs that they're patently overqualified for, and that is difficult wherever somebody's from. I think that there is work to be done with employers in Scotland about how they manage these processes. And I think, Justine mentioned in the intercultural communications training that we've been doing. So far, that has been very focused on working with support services and service providers. But I think employers are another group that we would be keen to kind of reach with that training, and keen to reach out to. There are other organisations beyond our own that have been doing work with employers. And Poverty Alliance has done some really sterling work with employers, particularly in the hospitality sector, and to get them to look at their prices and things like the extent of demand on somebody for what is really I don't want to say low skilled, because I think that's a problematic thing, but low paid work for which the qualification levels are quite low, and what we're asking of people to apply for that. But yeah, that's not something that we've focused on directly so far.
Thanks, Becca. I see Emma has her hands up. I also want to flag there's a book out just right now called The Science of Racism, which talks about and includes quite a lot of interesting stats around job applications and people's experience of doing that with names or from backgrounds which are not considered to be mainstream white British. So I think there's quite a lot of evidence that is ongoing as an issue within the employment context in Scotland and the UK. But handing over to Emma.
Thanks, Bex. I'm aware that there's an increasing number of employers now that are adapting their recruitment processes to make them particularly friendly to recruit refugees and migrants. So I went to a CIPD event recently, and they were talking about how they were translating their application processes, but actually making the application processes much shorter. So it just asked for really basic details like name, email address, and that they were using mentors and buddies through the start of somebody's employment to ensure that they could have the best chance possible of settling in. So I'm aware that this is a growing issue and that the CIPD is working on this. And maybe it's a question of finding organisations who are actively supporting migrants into employers, because there are quite big employers out there. I can't think of names off the top of my head, but who are spearheading initiatives around this.
So I noticed in the chat there's a question from Ian Finlayson about I think you're asking about the worrying about money resource and how often it's updated, and whether there's an opportunity to update it in a way that would be seasonal around what's available during summer and autumn and winter. The answer to that is I think that there would be a possibility for that. IFAN do a 6-month check-in with organisations for the resource, but I imagine that what we would want to do with something like that is to produce 2 resources that are checked every year to see if they're still updated for the next year, rather than every time, you know, developing a new resource every 6 months. But please do reach out and get in touch, and I'm really happy to have a conversation and to pull Sabine IFAN into that and see what we can do. But yeah, I think that there would be possibilities to do something there.
That's brilliant. Just noting there's a couple of shout outs from Helen around the work of Kembo, and links to the training that they also do, and I think which is superb and very important in terms of tackling inequalities and looking at that in those contexts. Just trying to check if there's anything else that I've missed in terms of questions. I got a bit distracted there, but my neighbour was mowing the lawn very loudly. I had to shut the window. So yeah, and I think I think you'd mentioned about training coming up. I think just to say, once that is out, we won't just put it out to TSI Network and TSEF. We'll get it out to via the local authority colleagues, to Skills Development Scotland, and Ian, noticing you're there from DWP, absolutely very keen to support engagement and promotion of these tools for colleagues in DWP as well. So anything we can do, if you found this useful or you think this is helpful, then, you know, I'm sure we'll be delighted to, and Becca and the team will be delighted to kind of help connect that and see how we can kind of roll that out in other places and spaces if that's felt to be helpful. So yeah, really keen to kind of just keep using these. So I think there's there's lots of people saying they'll be in touch.
That's fine.
That's definitely the outcome of this session. We're really, for us, it's very, very important that these tools are there and out there and being used and practical. The language thing is just downloadable straight from the web page, but you will get Becca's email as well. So just a quick check, because I noticed there's a few people needing to disappear. So Jane, is it worth us popping into the chat the link for the evaluation? So we would be really grateful to have your feedback. If anybody's having to disappear, we're happy to stay on and keep chatting, but just make sure that's in there. And also we will share the link to all the recordings. It takes a week or so for the recordings to go up, but all the recordings of this and previous thematic workshops that we've hosted are available to watch again, and that does get taken up really well. I noticed there's been a bit in the chat, and Alison, you've mentioned again around the skilled worker, and do you want to kind of do you want to kind of chat about that and this sort of issue, or is that something to kind of follow up maybe more in a one-to-one conversation? I think it sounds like making sure that people are getting to the right support in the right places. Am I seeing that right, Alison? Do you want to come in? Just check. Nope. Okay, we'll leave that where it is then, and it can be a follow-up, hopefully.
Sorry, is that me? Is
yes.
that on just my little thing on behalf of a client? I'm not used to Zoom, so it took me ages to find the button to unmute myself. Sorry. So is that just my final plea that you were referring to?
I think it would be useful to hear about the skills point as well. I think the support that SDS can provide in different areas around that skills tool is also super helpful.
Yeah, I don't know if I posted that, if that was specs or whatever, and certainly in terms of the comparison, what we can do is although we can't help the full statement compatibility, or as MPEGs, or I think it was, or someone else actually posted that we're not able to help with the transcription costs, etc. We can certainly give someone an idea of where their qualifications sit. So I think someone from the DWP said it's difficult to transfer qualifications, which it is, certainly vocational qualifications, but we can certainly do some work or some piece on letting people know where their qualifications sit in relation to our own. We're not allowed to say equivalences because it may not be a direct equivalence, but we can certainly give some sort of idea of where their qualifications sit and how they compare to other ones. But we can do a whole piece on skill, on any sort of work on skills, identifying skills, a whole lot of work on employability as well. But I think some of the resources that you mentioned today, I would be particularly interested in as well. So I think I've got quite a wee bit from today. So thank you for that.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Alison. And you've just actually reminded me to share the toolkit that was developed by Capital City Partnership in Edinburgh. So it's on the Joined Up for Business website, which is a kind of employer engagement toolkit, which helps signpost both employers and people who are seeking work to just some useful tools and resources around things like skills and eligibility. It's been a while since I've looked at it, so I'm wary of saying things that aren't on that. But yeah, it is a useful toolkit which has been specifically developed around this issue. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other comments or questions, then I think it just leaves us to say a huge thank you to Becca and the whole team at Migration Policy Scotland for all the work they've done on this, and to Shaina and Justine for coming and talking about your role in helping develop them and the experience and impact of some of those tools and how they have kind of landed in the real world. And we hope that that you will go forth and be fruitful with their use. Thanks everybody for coming along, and thanks to Jane for your support behind the scenes. Look forward to seeing you at the next event. Cheers.
Thanks so much, everyone.